All right, hello and welcome to today's webinar on social media for elected officials, what's personal and what's public. My name is Megan and we are very excited to have you here today. And I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Alex Bowman. Alex is our Director of Customer Experience here at Archive Social, but also an award-winning entrepreneur and startup strategist. As Director of Customer Experience for Archive Social, Alex ensures our existing and potential clients receive first-class treatment in all of their interactions. She's been working with Archive Social's customers for over 5 years now, and in that time has helped hundreds of people navigate the ins and outs of the social media platforms that we're going to talk about today. I noticed that I messed up the order here, but before we do get started, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to take care of. First off, all attendees are on mute, but please feel free to use the question function to submit questions throughout. There will also be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, and additionally, after the webinar, we will be sending out an email to share additional resources, the recording of this webinar, and the slide deck itself. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Alex.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is a very timely topic. We are going to be talking about how elected officials use social media. I know on the line we have both people who are current elected officials, those running for office, and several of you who work with those office holders, and I'm glad that all of you have come today. What we want to cover in today's webinar are some key bits of information that you need to know before these officials take office in January. First, I'm going to spend some time separating out what is personal on social media and what is public, and really clarify for you the difference between different types of Facebook accounts, because that's something that I hear mixed up almost every day. We're going to talk about the three major risk areas that your officials need to be aware of before they start representing your agency online. We're going to take a moment to talk about comment moderation, because that's also very misunderstood and probably the area that most people get themselves into trouble in the quickest. And finally, talk about social media policies for your officials. So before we get into the risks, I want to take some time to clarify the difference between a personal profile and a professional page on Facebook. These terms are so important and they get misused almost constantly. I see it every day. People say a Facebook account, they say my Facebook page. What they really mean is a profile. And the difference between these two things are key to everyone, are key to everything that we're going to talk about today. So let's clarify them. A Facebook profile, like you see here on the left-hand side, represents an individual person. This is a real human being who has friends and likes and favorites. This is Steve Schewel. This is our city's mayor right now. And on the left, you'll see his profile. Profiles have friends. They make posts, and they're very limited. You can close a profile down so only a handful of people can see what you're posting, or you can make it open in public. By contrast, a Facebook page represents an office, an entity, an agency, or in some cases, a public official. But the difference is anyone can see a Facebook page. You cannot make it private. It is public. Even if an individual, even if a member of your constituency doesn't use Facebook personally, they can visit your Facebook page and read the things that are posted there. They can find information about your office hours, about your social media policy. It really is what you need to be using to represent the office and the office holder, not a profile. Profiles can put you into legal jeopardy because they limit your audience and because they are more difficult to interact with. The other thing I want to clarify is the difference between an office and an office holder. And this is important because, as you know, office holders move in and out where an office stays the same. This example is from the city of Chicago. On the left-hand side, you see the page, the Facebook page for the Chicago mayor's office. This page will remain in control of the city of Chicago in perpetuity. The mayors will change. The Facebook page for the Chicago mayor's office stays the same. On the right, the same mayor, but this is the mayor's official page for herself and her campaign. So the difference here, even though this is an individual on the right, she can still have an official page representing herself and as the office holder. Both of these are essential for public officials, but one of them is controlled by the city or the agency being represented, and the other one is being controlled by the individual filling that office. And the reason this matters is because the office holder, as I mentioned, is transitory. And this can matter when it comes to who controls the followers, who controls the content, who controls everything that happens on those pages. The mayor's office Facebook page can be managed by numerous people in that office and by the city. It can have city-related matters on it. And when the mayor leaves office, all of the followers, all of the content, all of the history there remains with the city. Whereas an office holder may want to use their own page to campaign after the fact, after they leave that particular office. And they want to take their followers and their content with them. So having both is a good practice, to have both a page for the office and for the office holder. This allows you to have separation of ownership. One good tip that I want to give to those of you who are entering office or hoping to is, once you do, you should, first of all, even when you're campaigning, please don't use your profile. For all the reasons I mentioned before and some more reasons later, using just your profile is going to put you into a tricky situation down the road. Turn your profile into a page. It's very easy to do, and keep control over that. The reason why is, if you're campaigning now, you have those followers, you should probably unpublish that page once you take office. But then once you want to run again, you can republish it and pick up where you left off with your followers and your fans. When you do take office, pin a post to the top that says, hey, yes, this is me, but right now I'm fulfilling the duties of the office. Please put your comments and questions on the official office page. The other good tip is to use an autoresponder to drive people to the office page, and so it can be official business and not relating to you as a candidate, but relating you in your role. So just to recap, a profile represents you as an individual person, preferably in your private life, not as you as a candidate. A page represents you as a candidate, as an office holder, and a page can represent the office itself. And it's important to keep in mind that you want to maintain those separate and want to maintain them in the same way. The benefits of using a page versus a profile are numerous. Number one, I already mentioned, this provides access to your constituents. Access to government is limited when you're using a profile. At one point, you can limit it to who your friends are. It doesn't give that fair and open access to the office that a page does. Number two, messaging. Messaging is common on Facebook, particularly with offices. But the difference between messaging a profile and messaging a page is that when you message a profile, it cannot be accessed for public record purposes. It cannot be archived for public record purposes. These are important things to remember. A page gives access to their messages that can be archived and kept as public record and can be shared by multiple users. Also, management. When you set up a Facebook page, you can have multiple contributors and editors and admins on that page. It makes it easy to keep tabs of everything that's going on. It makes it easy to transfer ownership later on. And it makes it easy for you to have multiple contributors. If you can't be everything to everyone all the time, but you probably have staff who can contribute to that page. And that is much easier when you have a page and not a profile. And finally, I mentioned this in context of messaging, but it is also true in context of comments. The only way that you can preserve your comments for public record law using an archiving tool is to have a page, because Facebook limits access to profiles and limits access to comments. And so if you want to be transparent, and I know you do, you need to be using a page. Okay, why are we here today? Why am I going to, in a minute, I'm going to start talking about the 3 big risks that you need to be concerned about. But the big question is why? Here's why. The news is filled with all kinds of stories. Every week we see something new coming in about trouble related to social media. All of this trouble is avoidable if you follow the steps we're about to share with you. The reality is, social media, even though it's been around for 20 years now, if you think back to the days of Friendster and MySpace, It still is relatively new in terms of communication, and the rules are still being written. But here's the thing, time and time again, case after case, we are seeing the judges and the courts rule with the side of the public and rule with the side of transparency. Every day we're seeing officials getting in trouble for blocking users, for deleting comments, for keeping people in the dark about what they're doing online. That's why you need to be paying attention to these rules, and you need to get ahead of it with a good policy. So let's talk about the top 3 areas of risk for your public officials and what you need to be concerned about. Number 1, and a lot of the articles I shared in the previous screen cover this, you have to make sure that everyone who is in office and working for those in office understand the First Amendment and understand what viewpoint discrimination is and how they should avoid it, because these are where the lawsuits are coming from. It's coming from these First Amendment violations and viewpoint discrimination. Number 2, you need to understand that as a public figure, you're generating public records that the entity is responsible for producing. We're going to cover a story in a minute that comes out of Pennsylvania that shows this in stark detail. And number 3, you as an elected official and the elected officials that you work with really need to understand and have clear policies helping them separate their personal life and their professional life, because mixing the two is definitely an area of risk. So let's start by talking about viewpoint discrimination and First Amendment concerns. First Amendment is probably one of the biggest topics in the news right now in all kinds of spheres, and particularly on social media. And what it does is it protects, as you know, the right of US citizens to have, and US residents to have free speech and say what they need. And it prevents government from limiting that speech. However, it is not 100% freewheeling. Anybody can say anything at any time. There are actually categories of speech that don't get full protection under the First Amendment. But these areas are very, very limited, very limited. So you can't just, for example, obscenity is not protected. Direct threats of violence are not protected. But what is a direct threat? It can be pretty tricky to determine. You can limit spam. You can limit commercial postings. There are limits you can place, but you have to be sure that you understand what you cannot do. What you may not do is remove or block comments or commenters based solely on opinions. Opinions are protected speech. A lot of the stories we've seen lately of politicians getting in trouble for blocking commenters are because they're blocking people who have different views. You cannot discriminate against someone's viewpoint online, in person, anywhere else as an elected official. You have to understand and articulate the difference between what you allow on your social media and what you don't, but all of those have to follow under the rules of the First Amendment. We have seen more cases about people blocking users than anything else, and I have yet to see one where the person who did the blocking was found in the right. Time after time again, we have seen that you cannot block your users on social media. So what can you do? We're going to get into a little later setting up a policy, but you need to understand what these limits are. We have a really handy guide on comment moderation. If you choose to moderate comments, there's a really good flowchart that we have that we'll make available to you after the webinar to follow that flowchart and keep it limited to that. And you also have to remember that you have to be consistent and apply if you're going to have a policy, you have to apply it fairly. Number 2, this is the next thing you need to be concerned about. When public officials take office, they're representing your agency, they're representing your city, your state, your town. They're creating records that your agency is responsible for producing. When you post on social media in an official capacity, you are creating records. And your city can be held responsible. Here's a story out of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania from a few years back. It was called A Tale of Two Mayors. Public has right to only one Facebook page, not the others. And this story I really like because it illustrates a lot of what I've discussed here today. Number 1, if you read this article, which is sourced there, you will see that part of the problem is that they don't understand the difference between a Facebook profile and a Facebook page. throughout the articles I've seen about this case, people refer to Facebook account or Facebook page, meaning profile. There is a difference. There is a difference. Please understand and use the right terms. But essentially what happened here is there was a mayor, and someone believed that the mayor had deleted comments on a Facebook page regarding a proposal about a public mural on the borough council page. And this woman said, "You deleted my comments. I'd like you to produce those in a public records request." And the city said, "No, it's not an official page." But it turns out that that page was actually representing the office of the mayor. It was publicized on the town's website as the official contact point for the mayor. And even though the judge agreed that they had not they didn't own the page per se, they did feel that the city was responsible. I'm sorry, it was not our city, it's a borough, was responsible for producing those records and ruled in favor of the person seeking those public records. And so here's a really good, I recommend that you read this article because you'll see everything I'm talking about with the confusion between what type of account it was and who was responsible for the records. But in the end of the day, the borough had to produce the records, which they were unable to do, and they did get fined for that. Public record is actually law in every state. It's law in your state. So if you think, oh, this doesn't apply to me because I live in Florida or Texas, I can tell you that you're wrong, because all 50 states have laws marking social media as public record, because this is official communication. When I first started with Archive Social, it was very common to see people just repost content that appeared elsewhere on social media. It was PDFs, bulletin board style. And then maybe it was not as much of a record because it wasn't original content. These days, we all know that there is original content being produced on social media. There's unique content being produced on social media. And the comments that come back and forth between constituents and the office or the office holders are all considered records of official business. More interestingly, we did a survey at the beginning of the year of a few thousand agencies. We had over 600 responses, and what we found was that the people who had received records requests said 1 in 4 of the requests they received specifically referenced social media content. Said, I want these Facebook posts, I want these tweets. So this is real, this is happening on a daily basis, and it is you who are responsible for producing these in the end. The problem is you cannot rely on the networks to produce this data for you. We did a study back in May of last year and found that 1 out of 12 records in social media gets deleted. And it doesn't have to be by you. That you might say, well, I never delete content, I never moderate or hide anything. But guess what? It doesn't matter. What happens on social media is that they have these convenient nested threads now to help make it easier for you to follow the conversation. The problem is whoever deletes the top level comment deletes everything underneath it. So even if you haven't removed content from your social media, the chances that somebody else has. And it happens in real time. It happens very quickly. Things can go viral very quickly and explode. We've seen this year where social media has kind of just exploded with use. People are stuck at home and they're angry and they're commenting, and things get heated and things get deleted. And at the end of the day, your agency is on the hook for those records, nobody else. Not the social media networks, not the commenter who deleted them, but you. It can also happen when a lot of people have become kind of fed up with Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else, and when they leave the network, all of their content goes with them, as well as all the content that was nested below their comments. And again, there's no way the network's going to tell you, oh, it wasn't you who deleted it. It wasn't your agency who deleted it. It was someone else. They're not going to tell that for you, and they're not going to provide those records for you. So you do need a plan to retain your own records. Finally, the other area of risk that we see a lot is there's a lot of confusion of what you can do to keep your personal and your professional life separate on social media. This comes to light, I think, most often that I've seen, not with long-term politicians, long-term officials. This comes up a lot, particularly with councils borough councils, city councils, who may have an active social media presence, and that's kind of why they got involved in becoming a council person. They are engaged, and when they switch over to office, they often forget to make that switch to that official role, that official page, and that can get you into a lot of trouble. So the things, you should definitely have a social media policy for your public officials, and your officials need to be trained on it and need to understand the reason. And the reason for it protects not just them, but also protects your agency, your city or your town or your county or your state from what they can do and get you into legal trouble. This policy should cover a lot of areas. It should cover your public record law, any local retention schedules, digital records policies that you have. It should cover information that's considered privileged or confidential. They may not realize that some of the things that they can tweet about or post about as a private citizen, they cannot do that under your general statutes once they're in office. They need to understand how to separate their personal and professional accounts, as we discussed already. They should refrain from using social media to communicate with city employees' personal accounts. We'll get into that later. They should be aware of any conflicts of interest. And then this one, which often gets missed, they need to be aware of open meetings law and social media quorums. It can happen if you have a city council and one council member is posting on their page or commenting on a citizen's page, and other council members respond to that comment or respond to that post, they can find themselves with a quorum, and that violates open meeting law because it's no longer open. So they need to be aware of who they can interact with online, in what format, and it can be, it's upon you. If you are a clerk, if you're representing your agency as a full-time employee, you need to help your public officials understand these limits. So here's some additional behavioral concerns that you should include in your policy and make your officials aware of. One, they need to be cautious about comments that concern the city. Again, they should not be making any comments that could be perceived as a statement from the official office on their personal profile. They have to recognize that they represent an office now and not just themselves, and be aware that posting about city business or state business or county business on their personal profile can be a violation. Two, they should be very aware that the impact of what they're saying changes now that they have an office. It's not the same. A private citizen and an office holder have different impacts online. Three, consider whether you're liking, sharing, retweeting, commenting on anything that's out there that could be considered as an endorsement. This is something that it's worth saying out loud. Say, hey, be aware that when you share about that business, you might be seen as endorsing that business, and your local guidelines may prevent that and may make that illegal. And four, they have to be sure that they're sharing accurate content. You're not just representing yourself anymore. You're representing a bigger entity. Make sure you're putting out the facts. Again, this is the great example from a policy. We did a webinar with our very own City of Durham. That's where we're based, a couple years ago with Amy Blaylock. And she shared, I'm going to share a couple things from their policy over the next few slides that were really helpful. This is what I mentioned a minute ago about the open meetings law. If enough public officials are engaging on a post, it can result in a quorum, and it needs to be reported immediately. They do archive their posts, and so they have a mechanism for this, but it is a good example of something you want to include in your social media policy. The other aspect of a social media policy that you may not think about, but does matter to the employees of your agency, is make sure you train elected officials, and as an elected official, understand that you shouldn't just mention individual employees on your Facebook page. So this is a good example from City of Durham. They made it very explicit of how to communicate with city employees about city-related matters. I know if you just got in office and you're so excited to solve problems and get things done, and someone tweets at you, hey, there's a pothole on my street, and you go, oh, I know Megan in Public Works, and she'll get this fixed. I'm going to tweet at Megan. Don't do that, because now you've just exposed this private citizen who's just going about their job to who knows what online. Better policy is to tweet it at the Public Works Department for your city or at City of Durham. So what City of Durham did here is they laid out explicitly how you can pass on concerns to get shared with you as an official to the appropriate agency in your city so that you're not exposing individuals who may want to keep their lives private online to public scrutiny and public input. So as I mentioned, we did do a webinar, and we will share out a link to that webinar that was all about how the city of Durham got buy-in for their social media policy for the city council. All the steps they went through to get it put into place was really elaborate, and really they learned a lot. They're very good about sharing it. This is their policy online. If you want a good example of a social media policy for elected officials, this is the final approved policy. And after the webinar, we'll share out the link to Amy's webinar where she talks about the path she took to get there. Okay, so the key takeaways from today, then we're going to take some questions. I see a lot of questions came in. One, if you want to keep your private life private, remain personal, don't use it for official purposes. It's very easy to create a page of your profile and make that your public-facing voice and your public-facing presentation. And you definitely have an official page for the office itself, and also probably for you as an office holder. It's the best thing you can possibly do. Two, don't block users or delete comments just because they criticize you. You have to have a policy that respects viewpoints. That's actually jumping ahead to number 4. If you limit what followers from posts, the limit should be reasonable and viewpoint neutral and enforced consistently. Step 1 is have that policy. Step 2 is train everybody on it. And step 3 is use it consistently. Don't apply it to one individual and then not apply it to another. Be consistent. And if you do moderate speech on your account, don't forget due process. And again, all of these things, you're better protected if you're doing this with an archive in place, so that if there's any question of what happened or if you were being consistent with your policy and applying it consistently, you can at least back it up with the records to show what you did and why and how it tied back to your policy. So this is the key takeaways. Megan, I think you have a poll for us?
Yes, thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, so really quickly before we get into Q&A, I do want to launch a quick poll here. And really this poll is just to understand from you guys if you would like to be contacted after this webinar to further understand either your state laws for public record responsibility, to learn more about comment moderation, to find out if your social media presence or website is non-compliant, to speak to someone directly about how Archive Social can help, or all of the above. And as always, we are here to help. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics or all of them, just let us know and we will follow up with you after today's event. And I'm just going to leave this poll up for a little bit so you guys have time to answer. But while it's running, Alex, do you want to go ahead and get started on some Q&A?
Yeah, that'd be great. I see some good questions came in live during the webinar, Megan, and I know we got some in advance. I'm gonna grab one real quick and while you queue up the next one.
Awesome.
So this came in from a couple people, from Reese and then also I believe Kim. The question is, are candidates subject to open record laws or is it only for elected officials? In terms of the record laws themselves, that does apply to the office, to elected officials. I think that the record keeping you might want to keep in mind for candidates has to do more with, and I don't see how this would relate to your social media, but if there's any kind of campaign finance things, so someone pledging money of support, but really it matters once you become an actual office holder. As a candidate, you're still effectively a private citizen, unless you're running for re-election, and then obviously you already have office and it does matter, but it really matters once you take office.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. Here's a question that came in prior to the event. Do the potential legal issues and First Amendment apply to public safety employees, particularly police?
Yes, anybody who works for a public agency is subject to those First Amendment policies. Now, I want to be really crystal clear here that there's a difference between acting as a representative of your agency on Facebook and acting as a private individual on Facebook. And it's when we talk about policy, in this presentation, we talked about social media policy for your officials, and that governs what your officials are doing. I just actually earlier today did a webinar for law enforcement agencies in Florida, and I talked to them about how it's important to have a social media policy that is for your officers and for your employees of your agency, that governs what they should do online and how they're representing you, even when they're not on the official page. Now, every state is different how much you can govern what your employees do online, and every role is different. There's actually a different set of standards for public safety than there would be for just an employee of a city. It is important to know those differences and know what you can and cannot limit, but it is great and important to train everybody in your agency on proper use of social media to protect the reputation of your agency, but also to protect the reputation of your employees. And really, I think a lot of people don't understand what they're exposing themselves to when they go online. And so it's always helpful to have a policy to kind of help them understand it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And while you take this question, I'm going to give everybody just a final chance to answer the poll before I go ahead and close that. So, Alex, does a community have to have a social media presence?
Do they have to have a social media presence? They're not, like, there's no requirement. You don't have to by law. So the difference is, I think this goes back to what I said earlier of if you do have a presence, it needs to be publicly accessible. So there's no law saying your city has to have a Facebook page. However, if your city is using Facebook in an official way, you do have to use it in a way that's accessible by the public, meaning using it as a page and not as a profile. So it is recommended. I mean, that's the way people are getting their news right now. That's the way people are getting their information. And especially younger generations and younger voters and younger participants in your civic society are turning to Twitter and Facebook first to find information about what goes on in your city before they go necessarily to your webpage. So it is definitely a great way to connect with the members of your community, but not a law. You don't have to have one.
Awesome, thank you. And I am going to go ahead and close the poll now.
Okay.
And with that,
you see my nice flowers.
Yeah, of course.
I lost my. Okay, well, we can look at that. We'll continue to take questions.
All right. So what are the ramifications of elected officials commenting on official business using their personal accounts?
This is a great question. So it really depends. This is, I mean, one of the reasons why, like I said, the city of Durham created a social media policy for elected officials is because we have very active council members. We have very active elected officials who are out in the world making comments. And they needed a little bit of guidance and they needed a little bit of kind of help figuring out what they should and should not do. The best thing they can do is not use their profile, as I said. That can get them into trouble quickly. And then the next best thing they can do is be very crystal clear that they are representing that office and that they're representing a view. And then the third thing is, when I was talking about the city of Chicago and the difference between a page for the office and a page for the office holder. The page for the office should be a little bit more neutral on the official's opinion. The page for the office holder, put out whatever you want, because that's the kind of the point, right? That's you're campaigning, you're getting people to support you and elect you. But it's important to separate you from the office. And so I would recommend to elected officials to create a page that is of themselves, so that they have that freedom to express a personal opinion that doesn't impact the office and the agency that they're working for. So let the office page be more neutral and be more informative, and then you can have your office holder page where you have more freedom to express yourself. And do be careful when you're commenting in groups and on profiles, because one, that's not as public, but it can come back and come out to bite you. And two, you shouldn't be making official statements in those private settings.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. So I think let's go ahead and just start taking some live Q&A. So another good one that came in was, when you were discussing profile versus page, they noticed a blue verified check mark. Is that important for city officials or a general city page to have? And if so, how do you get that added to your profile?
Yes, that check mark is really important. I will tell you there's differences here in where you can get that. Let's talk about Facebook. Facebook has very specific rules for how to get verified. The reason it's great to be verified on Facebook is because it's a symbol that you have, that you can be trusted, because the things that they will do to make sure they'll verify that your profile is real, that you are a real person. You can't get a verified check if you have a dummy profile. They'll insist that you set up two-factor authentication, which means that your account is more secure and less likely to be hacked. They will also make sure that you are representing that agency and that agency is real. So Facebook does the work to prove that you are you and your office is your office, so that the general public, when they see that check, can trust that that's who's speaking and that's who's being represented through the page. So yes, I would recommend getting verified. There are pretty straightforward process for doing that. I'll mention a group that you should join once you are in office. You have office holders. It's the Facebook group for government, politics, and advocacy in North America, and that's kind of your doorway into getting verified on Facebook. On Twitter, starting about a year and a half ago, really restricted who they will verify. It is challenging to get verified on Twitter if you're not already very well known. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but I will tell you that it's much harder to do these days.
Awesome.
Okay. All right, this is a really good, I saw a question come in from Rochelle. If someone intentionally places misinformation frequently on an official government page, is it okay to ban them from the page if the information they're posting poses a public health risk? This is an excellent question, and I wish I have a definitive answer for you, but I don't. I'd say this is probably the question of 2020. Let me answer it this way. You can't just start out by banning someone from the page or blocking them. That's going to get you in trouble. You need to start from the basics. You need to start by having a clear moderation policy that you're applying equally. You need to let the person know, hey, you are posting misinformation and it's not allowed on this page, and you're likely to get that banned or blocked. And 3, you really need to have records that say this is why that person is blocked. Now, I'm not saying that all those things are going to still protect you in court. The person could still sue you for blocking them, and that's what we've been seeing lately. So I am not going to advocate yes or no here that you can or should, but if you're even considering it, you need to take the steps to protect yourself before you even do it. You might also just consider responding. This is misinformation. Here's the correct information over here. Repeatedly pointing them to the correct place. And after you've done that a number of times, I would say that it is okay to just ignore them, as I think that our people are coming to your page to get the information from you, not from some rando who's posting to your page. So I think that we worry about it a lot, but probably we should worry about it less, because they're coming to your page because they trust the information you're putting out. So if you're putting out consistent, correct information and correcting that misinformation, then I think you're in a good place without blocking.
And I just want to announce to the group in the chat right now, I'm sending out the name of that Facebook group that Alex just mentioned. That is highly recommended to join, and honestly is the only way that she has found to get a response from Facebook, really. So definitely recommend joining that group.
They have a question here from Melissa Reese. Do you recommend having a separate council generic page? We have a city website and elected officials manage their own pages. You know, I think that really depends on your local situation. What the city of Durham did, it was they encouraged the city council to have official pages that were archived and followed a policy, but there is not one group council page. They referred people to the main city page for information that the council would provide, or decisions that the council has made will get published on the main city page, not a dedicated city council page. Yes. Could I clarify that if an elected official comments on city business on their own profile, that it's not public record? That is true, but they have to say, I am commenting on this, this is not the official position. So it's really, you got to be really careful here. This is a fine line, and the reality is it's a fine line that has not been fully decided by the law. And so the recommendation is either to say, hey, this opinion is my own and does not represent my city or my office, or avoid posting it on your personal page entirely, and you post it on your official page as an office holder. I saw someone who had difficulty contacting Facebook. That path that Megan shared in the chat is your best path in. Once you join that group, so this is a great little secret. If you try to get help from Facebook as an official or a city and you just hit help, your ticket is going into a bottomless queue. This group was set up to help streamline support for government and public officials. And so step one is joining that group that Megan put in the chat. And then once you're a member of that group, you're able to submit a support ticket directly to the government team that is set up just to help government and public officials. And you'll get much faster service, and they're much more knowledgeable about the specific challenges that you're facing. Let's see, Megan, you have any other one? There's a lot of questions here.
Yeah. I guess, could you talk about if currently somebody has their staff designated access the agency Facebook page through their own login, so that's how they access the agency page, and they're under the impression that that's unfavorable practice. So are they to create an agency login and share the password with the designees as admin or editor? And is there any hangups to consider in changing the login?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this, because the way you have it set up now, where individual staff access it through their own login, is the correct way to do it. You should be using Business Manager, and Business Manager is a way that you can manage multiple pages at once and makes it very easy to add paid individuals as page roles. They can be an administrator, an editor, an advertiser, a moderator. It controls the level of access and what they can do, and the advantage to this is manyfold. Number one, if you share a login or use dummy profiles, you're very likely to get shut down by Facebook and lose access to your page entirely, and it's a pain to get it back. Number two, when you have individuals using their real profiles to post and manage your page, you can see who has done what. The public doesn't. The public just sees the city of Durham. You can see that this individual at your city posted this comment. And so if something gets posted inappropriately, it's very easy to figure out who did it and track it down and and educate them, and like, hey, you can't post that on the city page, and here's why. It also it doesn't show you who deletes things, but it then show you who hides things through activity feed. Definitely don't share logins. That's very insecure. We have great resources about how to use Business Manager and how to set it up. And it's basically the Facebook terms of service also require it. So if you want that coveted blue check mark or the gray check mark, you're gonna have real people using their real individual profiles to manage your page. So don't change it. Stick with what you've got now, and we can share some resources to help you understand how to do that better.
Awesome. Okay. And so would you recommend having a separate council generic page? This one city they have a city website, and elected officials manage their own pages.
I answered that one. Sorry.
No, you're good. I'm all over.
Yeah. Let's see.
What about elected officials posting personal political viewpoints on their personal page?
We did that one too. Let's see. My exposed. Okay, so here's another question that's related to one I just answered about using your personal profile to manage a page. This comes from Yolinda. I manage social media for my city sewer division. For Facebook, I use my personal Facebook to admin privately. Am I exposed to ever having my personal account accessed for a public records request? I can tell you that in 6 years in the business of working with thousands of agencies across the country, I have heard this concern. Linda, I have never seen it happen. I have never seen case law where the individual poster has their personal information requested and like for a records request. I know that there are certain states who are more concerned about this than others. And I've even challenged in those states, hey, have you ever seen this happen? Has this actually happened? And the answer has been no. So even when the new feature, Facebook has this new feature called page transparency in admins, and I've heard people go, oh no, they're going to post my name there. They don't. All that page transparency feature does is it says, yes, we know that these people are real and that they're based in the United States or based in whatever country you're based in, but it does not actually show the names of the admins who are posting it. You can see as an admin who's posted to your page, but the public only sees the name of your agency and not individuals. So thank you for asking that question. I do not think you should be concerned. Continue using Facebook the way you are, because that is the correct way. Okay.
Hey,
How many more questions do we have time for, Megan?
Probably about 2 more. And just really quickly, do you think for that Facebook group, can you join that group as a staff member supporting elected officials?
Yes, they ask you a question to link to the page that is the public entity. But if the official has a page, as long as you're like an admin on a page or editor on a page that is falls under the categories of government, politics, or advocacy, you should be able to join that group.
Awesome.
I was allowed to join that group, and I don't work for the city, but they know who I am, so that's probably part of it. Okay, let's see. I think we've covered a lot of these questions. Again, we're going to share out some excellent resources after the webinar, including a link to that webinar I mentioned where Amy Blaylock talked about how they put the policy in place for the City Council for the City of Durham. And then here's one more question we haven't talked about is we recently learned Facebook auto-generates pages for places, in our case, a local government page. We, the government, did not create this page. However, there it is. It exists. Can you talk about the effect of these auto-generated pages and the content that aggregates to them? Yeah, this usually happens if you actually don't have a page representing your place. And you can claim that page as your city. I don't know the process exactly, but if you join the group that we mentioned in the chat, they can help you out claiming that page. This happens, I'll be honest, if you don't create a page for your city. People often step up and create, either Facebook auto generates those place pages, which don't have much content, or sometimes I've seen members of the public create a page on behalf of a city because there was no other option. So I do recommend you at least claim your Facebook page so that you can control the content and hide it if you'd like to, or unpublish it.
Awesome.
Okay, I think we've covered most of the bases here, and we are going to be sharing recording and this deck with you, so not to worry if you missed something. Yes, you can use Facebook Messenger, just don't use it on a profile, because again, if you use it on a profile, it is obscure from the public. If you use it on a page, it is accessible to public records and can be archived. Okay. Oh, and this one last one, Megan, I know I said we were going to be done, but this one's a good one. I recently started boosting my posts on Facebook, and once I posted a post that used the word campaign regarding a land grant, and Facebook rejected my boost. Do you have any recommendations? Yes, Facebook may have gotten a little bit of heat from the world about how they've handled elections. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but they definitely get a little trouble for that. And so in response, they have tightened up their ad policy, and pretty much any ad or boosted post, because that's considered an ad, that mentions a lot of keywords like campaign or the even an office, election, elected official, mayor, city council, senator, anything that is naming anything related to an election, elected official, or politics in general will be flagged as a political ad and needs to have further guidance. I know it's extremely frustrating for a lot of people, but now that you know how to avoid it. If there's another group, one last group I'm going to recommend you join before we leave here today, and that is the government social media community on Facebook. This is an unofficial group of your peers and communicators from across the country, and a lot of them have dealt with this issue and share lots of helpful tips on how to adjust your ad copy and how to adjust your images so that you don't get sucked into that elections filter.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's just really on the top of everyone's minds right now. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to follow up with us after the webinar and we'll try to answer by email.